meeting to order at 7:05 p.m. on March 21, 2023. Present, we have Vicki Kahn, Susan Sherry Clark, Jeff Gibbons, Barbara Roberts, William Hine, and Stephanie Davis, and myself, Ed Wisnowski. Also, we have liaison from planning, David Wilcox, and town historian, Julie Green. And as guests at the meeting, in person, we have Julie Burmeister and Tom Watson. And I think that accounts for everyone. So this meeting is being held in person and virtually online. Parties wishing to observe online may go to the town clerk's portal and tap on the live button at the top of the page. Otherwise, if individuals are willing to participate, they would have to participate via Zoom. If you do participate via Zoom, you may, on any item of business, either raise your hand on the Zoom account, on the Zoom display, or indicate in the chat area the agenda item that you're interested in. CTV is moderating the Zoom link and is also providing the recording for this meeting. With that, I think I've covered the bases. So we have the agenda for today, the first item being the February 21st, 2023 minutes, which were produced and distributed to everyone. I hope you all had a chance to review it. And I think they were also, Stephanie requested any kind of comments or revisions that might be needed and did not receive any. So I think it's in order to have them moved and approved. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Moved by Vicki, seconded by Barbara. All in favor?
Aye.
The minutes are approved. We've demolished the demolition permit applications. So we'll move on to construction permit applications, which we can also demolish. Certificate of appropriateness is not an item for discussion today. We did receive 2 referrals from the planning board. 9 and 6 Oak Drive, Noyak.
4 and 6.
4 and 6, thank you. 4 and 6 Oak Drive, Noyak, for a proposed 2-lot subdivision. Was there any response made? Did anyone catch anything for it? Offhand, I
We
would.
reviewed it last year, I think, and filed a response at some point. So I'm not sure what, it was, I think, last fall sometime. Jeff? I don't remember the particulars of it, but I think there were 2 1930s houses, and the fellow was reconfiguring the 2 lots.
Yeah, I vaguely recall something along that.
One is a house, and the other one is a garage on the second lot. And their intention is to build a home on the second lot.
Okay.
So it will almost certainly be a demolition of the garage.
Okay.
So, but there's no sense that we need to readdress this in any fashion to the planning board?
No.
Okay, we will leave it as a silent event then. 14 Flying Point Road Watermill was a planning board referral for the proposed two-lot subdivision designed to accommodate the landmark structure. And I did send a response, since we had been reviewing this now for, I guess, 13 months. I think it was originally proposed in February of 2022. But the basic issue I raised for the planning board was that we all were basically aligned with the solution to preserve the building by having the subdivision take place and having it reconstructed. And from what I heard, Susan took some updating photographs today.
It changes the exterior every week or every other week, so I just, there's
Yeah,
nothing.
I did not get a chance to see them.
Nothing of,
Yeah.
to alert anybody over, it's just FYI. They did, the gable didn't have any room for a window, but they went back and cut it in and put the new one in that is actually a replica of what was there before and replicated the exact
Right.
shingle
But
pattern.
I did send a response to the planning board indicating that in the interest of preserving the visible historic character of structures, that the landscaping be regulated in some way, as they did prior. They exercised some requirement on the property at 680 Scuttle Hole Road, when that was landmarked, to have some of the shrubbery cut back in order to allow a bit more visibility to the property. And even though this property is not on a well-traveled road at the moment, it still is, I think, important for people to see the historic character and style to the house, rather than having it masked by landscaping items. So
And
we'll
I can upload one of the pictures from across the road too. I'll do that. I'll add one more to that, on that same link. Before they had the mound of dirt, so you couldn't see the house unless you went to a certain, angle to look. But when they got rid of the mound of dirt, it looked like they've spread the hedges out, so it is completely hedged. However, they're thin and sparse right now, and you can see through them. But I'm not sure, as they grow, they thicken out. But that's a good point.
Just to add to that, with the facade easements to the CPF, we're making that part of the contract, is that the fence or hedge have to stay low so that people can see the home.
Do you have a height restriction on that?
Yeah, we have a height restriction, I think it's 4 feet.
Oh, 4 feet, that's great.
Yeah, so no, even if it's hedge, which there is no restriction on, or facade easement, there is, will be going forward.
That's good.
This one wouldn't, of course, be CPF, but even with the landmarks ones, we usually require that there was some type of a view, public view, so.
So, okay, so we have disposed of that portion, and now on to the major business of our meeting tonight. Julie has prepared an inventory as well as design guidelines for tentative Bridgehampton Historic District. This has basically been in the works for a long period of time, and some things have changed along the way, including some buildings disappearing and code changes, and it has kind of meant it's been a little bit of a moving target, interrupted by some COVID events. Julie, would you, maybe just to be heard, use the podium? And would you just describe the background of the review and design guidelines, where you got them from, and basically what they're patterned after, and so on?
Good evening, everybody. Okay, so the inventory has changed a little bit since 2021 when this was completed, but the design guidelines are patterned after, let me just find. They were heavily modeled on the following publication, the Village of Roslyn's Guidelines for Additions and New Constructions, which was prepared in September of 2007 by Dominique M. Hawkins. I obviously refer to the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation, Guidelines for Rehabilitation of Historic Buildings, Guidelines for Sustainability, for Treatment Standards, Preservation, Rehabilitation, Restoration, Reconstruction, Guidelines for the Treatment of Historic Properties, which the very last page, you can find all those resources. And then, as well as some other preservation resources that I worked with. But the guidelines are pretty standard. You can go to any village, town, hamlet that have done these guidelines, and they all kind of read exactly the same for the most part. So there's nothing unusual or new. Obviously, input from you all would be extremely helpful on that end to what works and what doesn't work. Ed, do you want me to go through the inventory?
Yes, eventually, but I just wanted to frame the fact that the standards come from basically the Secretary of Interior standards, which are rather uniform and generally used across the United States.
Right.
And adopted by many municipalities with respect to the standards for their historic districts. And also that the kind of judgments that eventually the Landmarks Board exercises in historic districts by code is required to follow the Secretary of Interior standards that, among other things, you've incorporated into this
Right.
document.
Right. So, we were talking about additions and what's acceptable, what is appropriate, sizing standards, scale, massing, all of that is pretty standard for historic structures. Proportion, you can find all of that. So that's basically where all of that was taken from. Orientation, rhythm and patterns, what do's and don'ts are all included in here. And then, architectural details that need to be well preserved. The character that defines these features is very important. Materials and textures are very important. The streetscape, I just noticed some new streetscape in Bridgehampton. And then the secondary buildings and structures as well. We got into a little bit of that. Some of the barns are just as old as or older than some of the structures, even though they are historic as well. Some of the accessory buildings are historic. So these are all things that add to the character. And then, building relocation. There's quite a few things in Bridgehampton on Main Street that have been moved from the north side to the south side, or vice versa. We have some structures that have been moved to the Bridgehampton Museum grounds. And then, about demolition and what is allowed and isn't allowed. And as you can see from the report, there are many built. There are, in the last 2 years, there are buildings that are missing, and there are streetscapes that are not really appropriate. And I don't know, we really need to kind of put this in motion because we're losing too many things so far. And the streetscape is changing. And when I first started working on this in 2020, and even earlier, Ed and I had worked together. You could see how somebody could get off the train and really see downtown as it was 100 years ago, and that is changing faster than it was, 10, 15 years ago. So really important that we work on this together, and you guys are doing some great stuff. So maybe we can make this kind of the flagship historic district in the town. And then we can work with a lot of the other resources we have, right? It's all about landmarking, it's all about preservation, community preservation, and then we can, put some of these other programs that we have, especially with the CPF. If something gets landmarked, then we can help maintain it.
So would you run through the inventory that
Sure.
is there? Okay.
So some of this inventory is town-owned. So on page 48, we're starting with the Nathaniel Rogers House. And this, of course, I kind of, in the inventory list, I try to work with if it's a contributing resource and why. Some of the resources, and we can go through all of this about some that have been built out, but the original structures behind, there's lots of that. But the Nathaniel Rogers House, I think we just got its certificate of appropriateness for the restoration work that was done since 2008. And so this, in my judgment, this kind of meets all the criteria for contributing structure. The Founders Monument, we still haven't figured out who owns that.
It's on the state of New York right-of-way.
Oh, it is.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Um,
Okay, so then,
Thanks to David
oh, thanks, David.
contacting the town engineer's office, who had a survey for the reconfiguration of the intersection.
Ah, okay. So that was just a recent kind of discovery when they redid everything? So then our next, so we have the monument, and then the next page 49, we have D.L. Chester's store, now known as Almond Restaurant. So this was built in 1907. It's a two-story brick structure. What's interesting is D.L. Chester had a store on Main Street that burned down, and he was determined to rebuild. So it was the first brick building that was built on Main Street, and it's actually in the spot of an earlier, much earlier structure, an 18th century structure that did burn to the ground. So he built this so that it was made of brick, therefore fireproof in his eyes, and it's been, other than being painted white, it's pretty much the same original structure. It even has his name when you walk in the front door. It's on the ground. And the next structures to the east or to the west of this building were built by his son in 1928, and there were about 4 buildings within this, and they were built by local contractors. Stonemasons were hired to build 4 one-story brick buildings, as I said, in 1928. And these have been one-story structure and have not changed. Maybe the colors have changed a bit. And then we have Triangular Commons, which is a historic militia ground from the 17th century. And then churches are still exempt, or is that changed?
Pardon?
Churches are still exempt?
No, churches are not exempt.
Not exempt,
Right.
okay. So you can see here we have next west is 2463 Montauk Highway, and this is the St. Anne's Rectory Building, Parish House, and the church. And I've given a little list of each structure's history. The church rectory, which recently was turned back into a rectory. It had been used as a parish thrift shop for a long time. It was St. Anne's Thrift Shop. But now it's turned back into a rectory. It was built in 1902 in Sagaponack. It was on an estate in Sagaponack and moved to Main Street. Along with St. Anne's Church. St. Anne's Church is actually the Sagaponack Golf Club, built in 1899. It was turned into an Episcopal church during the summer months for summer residents, and it was moved up to Main Street in, I believe, 1907 as well. So they brought all these structures together, and it's now St. Anne's Episcopal Church grounds.
I know one aspect of the movement of that church, that they left it sitting on the east side of Sag Pond,
Right,
until the ice froze, and they moved it across the ice.
yeah, it was
To the
moved.
west, to the west side.
Yeah, it was moved, I guess this would have been its second move up to Main Street, because originally Hanno Sherlock, who owned the Ezekiel Sanford House, which is on the corner of Bridge Lane and Ocean Road, which is one of the oldest structures in Bridgehampton. She's the one that had it moved over, and she used it, it was like basically moved it to her property first as a summer chapel and then moved to Main Street.
So again, looking at the references, they are certainly period pieces of architecture that's there, and the presence on, the presence on Main Street for a long period of time makes them very familiar, as therefore a landmarkable or contributing resource for the district.
Right, and what's also interesting to note, the parish hall, which is the one-story structure toward the back of the property, that was built with money from John Berwind. He was a coal magnate out of Philadelphia. He built Minden, which is also on Ocean Road, which is Leonard Riggio's home now from Barnes & Noble, has the big Richard Serra sculpture on the front lawn. So that was his home. He built that in 1912, and then he gave money to different causes throughout Bridgehampton. So he was the one that contributed the parish funds for the parish hall. And we think part of that might have been moved from another structure in Sagaponack, another estate, because the doorways resemble, unless it was just the same, architect or that worked on these two buildings. And St. Anne's was restored by an architect named, last name Ware. His first name is escaping me unless I have it here. And he was a summer resident, well-known architect in Manhattan for building fireproof buildings.
So you mentioned the Triangular Commons
Yeah, Triangular Commons.
as its significance.
Right, so the Triangular Commons, so that's just to the east, which is very interesting. It was a much larger, we call it Triangular Commons, it's this tiny little rectangle. It was a much larger park where they met the militia groups from East Hampton, Southampton, Bridgehampton. It was kind of a local, Sag Harbor, it was kind of a local meeting place for the militia to train. And it was also the site of, they erected the first Liberty Pole, which was the town's, the Liberty Pole was the precursor to the flagpole, which came down in a big bad storm, but it was a spar from one of the whaling ships or something, a ship that wrecked off of Mecox. But that's an interesting story because on Triangular Commons in 1799, they had a rally that was covered by New York papers. Aaron Burr was there along with David Frothingham, who was one of the first newspaper publishers. He did the Long Island Herald, which was the first newspaper from Long Island in Sag Harbor. And he was at that rally too, and it was all a pro-Jefferson Sonian rally. So it's a lot of history. The parking lot is owned by the town. That's in front of Triangular Commons, just east of the church, St. Anne's Episcopal Church. And that's where the Methodist Church first stood. And then it's the Methodist Church that is now further west on when you come into to Bridgehampton. But we can talk about that church when we get down there. They didn't, when the Presbyterian Church was built in 1842 on Main Street in Bridgehampton, the Methodist Church, the Methodist congregation was very upset. So they didn't like being usurped by this enormous new church, so they moved further west on Main Street. Because the Presbyterian Church was on Sagaponack Road originally, or its second home was on Sagaponack Road. So we have lots of moving around and lots of moving pieces, but it's a very cohesive Bridgehampton downtown for the last 150 years. It's pretty much been similar. So then we have, going further west, we have 32 Hull Lane, which is Bridgehampton's old cemetery, with its first interments in the early 1700s. As you know, the town of Southampton gave land to the inhabitants to bury their dead for free. So they would carve out certain pieces of land, and this was given in the early 1700s for that purpose for the inhabitants. And I think it is still active, but I'm not sure if they're doing any interments anymore. The Bridgehampton Presbyterian Church. So this was built in 1842, well after the cemetery. People think that they go hand in hand. The cemetery was there almost a little bit more than 100 years earlier. So the church just recently got National Registry of Historic Places, so that was in 2018. And that's an iconic Main Street church. Just trying to think if there's any questions so far? Okay. So moving to 2415 Montauk Highway, this would be one of those questions. Is this still a contributing structure? The building is there, but it had a whole facade on the first floor added to the front. So that would be something to be determined if that is considered, this was pre-me. I don't know if this was something that followed any sort of standards or how this was done. But as a contributing structure, if we don't talk about the facade, this was the former James Sanford and Sons Plumbing and Heating business, built in 1911, and it was their plumbing and water. They had a windmill water pump, and they serviced quite a few houses on Ocean Road. Some of the big estates got their water from the Sanford and Sons, and they owned quite a bit of buildings here. You'll see the next two. Sadly, one of the Sanford homes that stood just to the west of it, 2411, has been torn down. So this is a non-contributing structure. The next building, again, this would be one of those.
Can I just interrupt
Yeah,
one
sure.
thing? About 2415, the
Yep.
former plumbing shop,
Mhm.
AKRF, I think, described it as having diminished integrity.
Right.
Right,
Yeah, that's the phrase.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so I would say that it's
None.
not something that would be a contributing resource.
And then 2405, another Sanford house. This was used as a boarding house. So again, this is another structure where I think the 1980s, this whole front part was built out. The house, nothing's changed in the back end of the original boarding house, but I'm not sure if the integrity is left on this as well.
Question.
It is recommended by AKRF for being landmarkable.
Right.
Yeah, so,
And I don't know if any of you knew Mr. Richard Hendrickson, but this is where up in the back is where he would bring his reports, his weather reports. So.
I was going to ask a question. I was going to print out the report,
Mhm.
and then I saw that it was 91 pages. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm not buying all that ink.
No, I don't blame you.
But I see Stephanie there, like, making notes and stuff with a copy.
Yep.
I mean, I know it's expensive to get copies made, but
I can have CRC do some more copies. Yeah.
That would-
When
I
I
think it would be
originally had
helpful,
brought it
you know?
Yeah,
to you.
it is.
Well, we should all
to,
have had a copy
Because
today.
then you
Yeah, I
can
thought-
make notes about what
Yeah,
you think about certain
absolutely.
things. And
absolutely, I have no problem with that.
Okay.
Originally, when I came to you all, and I'm not sure who was on the board at that time, in 2021, I offered it for everybody. And I didn't hear from anybody that they wanted it. So I'm happy to give you all a
Out
copy.
of guilt, I think, more than not,
right, because we
not wanting it, but I think people, with COVID and everything.
Yeah, I had
just
given
didn't
it to,
wanna-
so all the, I passed them around and stuff, so I will get them to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, nobody wanted to hand out these things during COVID. So I'm happy to get you all copies. I can make sure that you have them here for your next meeting, or I can get them, when, I don't know when you're all here at Town Hall, so,
For the meeting.
for the next meeting, or I can put them in the CRC office,
Pick them up,
and you
perhaps?
can pick them up.
Right, yeah.
Where is
that's
Dave's
easy.
office?
What?
Where is Dave's office?
Copies
Yeah,
of
but is it in
Julie's
where Janice is?
inventory could
I
be,
just never read it.
with your office,
Never mind.
members who are interested in a printed copy could pick them up.
Yeah.
Or even with Renee, and if you're in
Yeah.
the building, just stop by and ask for it.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's just a draft, so we only, we made a certain amount of copies, and because I kept going to them saying, can we change? And so, I'm happy to get
Let
these
me
for you.
just ask how many, I'm satisfied with the online copy, which will need some, by the way, some revisions to clean up and tweak.
Yeah, I
some
mean, I'm making notes, so I can certainly,
language,
Yeah.
So how many want printed copies when a final draft is done?
Well,
One,
but
I like the
before,
draft, I like this draft.
can't
we
we
have
get
this
the draft?
well, you
so
can
we
have the draft,
contribute?
you can have what I have immediately,
Yeah,
and then,
Right.
yeah.
okay.
I'm coming over tomorrow, so is it possible for me to pick a copy up
I can give
tomorrow
you-
after lunch?
I can give you my copy
Oh,
if you
thank
wanted.
Great.
If you don't mind some of my notes.
I like it.
Yeah, so absolutely, I should have thought to bring them. I thought maybe we had, yes, you're right, printing them out is kind of
Yeah,
insane.
but- So how many want a written or printed version? 1, 2, 3, 4? I'm satisfied, and you're satisfied with the
satisfied.
computer
Yeah,
PDF version that's
Yeah, I think-
on the website?
I think the one on the website is the most up-to-date of them. I think this is even a draft of a draft, so. But absolutely, I will get those to you.
How would the public get copies?
Just that it's online.
It's online?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I think it was in the agenda.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a link.
Google
There's a link,
yeah.
yeah.
Link was in the
Yep.
agenda.
Yeah, and originally, for the public, when it first came out and the supervisor wanted it on the website, it was actually in one of those, the banner things that goes by, so it was there, and now it's on the Landmarks and Historic District Board site. That's where it lives. All right, so 2397 Henry Chatfield's house. This is pretty much, other than, I think, probably the glass plate in the front. I'm not sure when that was changed, the front of the house. I do know that he used this probably as his law firm, but I'm not sure on those glass plates, if that was it's a newer addition, it looks to be. So, again, that would be something for you to decide if that's he was a prominent attorney in Bridgehampton, and the extended locale. He actually even worked out of the not that he didn't out of the Topping Rose house. He had a law office in there. I think he clerked with Judge Rose. So he's an important figure, as well as, obviously, it's this great building with this Craftsman and Queen Anne with the turret and all that, just kind of octagonal tower. It's kind of an interesting building and kind of the only one on Main Street. The next building, which is a little restaurant, it is on early maps. It may have been moved there, but It's about 1920, it starts showing up.
It's the Japanese.
Yeah.
Yeah.
cute.
Yamakyu. 2393, that is Bobby Vans, that's a non-contributing structure. And then we have a building that's non-contributing that is attached now to the Candy Kitchen. So the Candy Kitchen's at 2385. That was a lone standing building before, and that brick, that's original brick under all that.
That property, that was one site with both buildings, and it was subdivided about 3 or 4 years ago to, because it was in an estate, and it
Right.
was subdivided to
Stavropoulos'
settle the estate
Yeah.
along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. There used to be a wonderful house that stood there. Nathan Hand's house was a big, beautiful house. And I'm not
Which
sure if that
property
was
are you talking
demoed
about?
or years ago. I'm sorry?
Which property are you talking about? You talking about Candy Kitchen or the building next to it?
So it's all one structure now,
Yeah.
but the Candy Kitchen is
Part.
the contributing structure.
Right. But
So you can,
that's where the house was?
no, the house, so Candy Kitchen stood just that corner
Right,
piece.
Right.
And then there was a house that was set back. So that,
Where
the
the
brick
next building is?
atrium building was
Yeah.
built in the 1990s, thereabouts.
Maybe
Yeah.
80s.
Yeah,
Probably, yeah.
so I don't know how you
Yeah, I
you
understand.
parse, you know, you
I
pull
get, I
these two,
get it.
yeah.
I just didn't follow you down that road
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's hard to read, that's tiny up there. And then we have the next 2357, which is Montauk Highway, that is the community house built in 1923, or 21 rather. The town owns this building with a 100-year lease with somebody. So this was built at the time after World War I, where lots of towns were and villages were really welcoming their vets back from Europe, and built these community houses. The community house that stood across the street was kind of running. They were running out of space, and it wasn't enough for the town, for the hamlet. So another Berwind money funding this building.
And that building originally also housed the fire department.
Yeah, so the fire department is directly behind, which is now the Book Bay, the Bridgehampton Book Bay, if you're aware of that, and the Horticultural Alliance, their headquarters and library. That was the firehouse in the back. And I just wanted to mention, just because I'm here and I can talk about some of these historic people. So James Truslow Adams, he was the instigator in this, to have this building built. And he is a historian that lived down on, I think you all might even know, his house is called Wigwam. It's on Job's Lane in Mecox. And he was an author and historian. And the first book that he wrote was The Memorials of Old Bridgehampton. He wrote that in the 19-teens. And then he went on to write more histories of the United States. And he actually coined the phrase, the American Dream. That's where that comes from him. Yeah. He didn't mean it like what people think the American Dream is today. But he coined the phrase. So then we have some vacant land at 2339 Montauk Highway. I'm not sure, is this vacant anymore? This is, this had, the Pulver Gas Company was here.
Right.
It's torn
and
down. There's nothing.
Before that, that was, I don't know if you remember, it was a stucco building. It had the Studebaker icon on
Yeah.
the front of it.
It's
and,
in the back of the report.
yeah,
Is
it
the
was
demo.
not preserved, but
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a great,
sad to see it go.
great building.
Yeah.
I have it in the report because I had in the demolition. When it's gone, it's gone. And then we have Another piece of vacant land, there was a bungalow, a 1915 bungalow on that was demolished for another Farrell building.
It is now an office building that looks like the one below it.
Below is a good
It
word.
basically is
Sorry.
repeated in style, right next door.
Yes, and they put up some fencing on Main Street. Have you seen? Kind of metal fencing right on the sidewalk. Kind of bringing the two buildings together. And that, what was torn down to make way for that was the Sayer House, which was charming and delightful. And I don't know if any of you had ever been to Elaine Benson, but that was her gallery building. And now that's gone as well. So 2309 Montauk Highway, that's the Howard Halsey House. It is Salabello Antiques, which is still doing business there, built around 1902. And there's been some alterations in the late 20th century with glass plate windows and things like that. So again, another one to consider about contributing, non-contributing. I don't know, something that's been turned into a commercial business, depending on when it was turned into a commercial business, we have lots of, that, especially when we get to the north side of the street. That these buildings were built out in the early, the turn of the 20th century. Is that, still a contributing structure?
This whole line here was originally residential houses
Yeah.
set back from Main Street with nice front lawns and wonderful trees positioned around them. And of course now it's changed.
Yeah. So then 2297 has been demolished.
This house is demolished.
So this is Wallace Halsey's house.
Yeah, last year, and is going to be the site of another office building, just like the design of the ones we just saw a few
Another
seconds
Farrell?
ago.
Yeah.
Pretty much, it's a repetition in style by the same office builder.
And when these houses are gone, it's also, you're losing the history of these people. Wallace Halsey and they were just really influential people. He was a surveyor here in the town, and it's, his history dies along with the house. So, and then 2287, which is the next building west, which is a realty. It's a non-contributing structure. 2273. This is the Henry Fordham House, a three-bay side gable building embodying a vernacular interpretation of the Greek Revival style. Was constructed about 1830. It's clad in white wood shingles. It has the classical door surround with top light and side lights. The windows contain 6/6. So this is a real classic mid-19th century house. Side door. So this would be kind of what they called the half house that never got the other half.
Was he a blacksmith?
Yes,
And
Henry
his
Fordham.
blacksmith shop was close by, as I recall.
Yes, and was it his blacksmith shop that's moved to Noyak?
I think to Butter Lane.
Yes, to Butter. It was moved down to Butter Lane. There's another blacksmith shop that got moved to North Shore community in Noyak near Elizabeth Morton Preserve. There's where 51 Peconic, the William Caldwell House. It's just down, and the house, there was a fire at the house, but the little garage, which was a blacksmith shop, that survived the fire. But that was also on Main Street, but moved a long time ago. Yeah, so this is a Fordham, Hedges, all local names that have owned these houses. 2247 Montauk Highway, so this is the Methodist Church and Parsonage. built around, the parsonage was built around 1880. It's just to the east of the church and set back a little bit. Church Lane is on a angle there, so so the parsonage is actually on Church, and the church is on Montauk Highway. So the Methodist Church was started further down Ocean Road at the corner of Church Lane, and they outgrew their surroundings. So in 1833, they built this new church. So if you're looking at this, so the left-hand side with the tower, so the center structure was the original 1833 church that stood in the parking lot just east of St. Anne's Church. When they moved it in the 1870s, they added the two towers on either side. And that steeple came down in 1938. It is probably, originally it was probably double its height. The only thing that the steeple fell and sort of survived, and they just kind of didn't bother to build back up again. But it's a lovely church, lots of history, and of course it's gone through its own new parishioners there. It's no longer a Methodist church. The congregation, the Bridgehampton Methodist Church, Methodist congregation now is part of Southampton.
But do the Methodists still own it?
I think it's all part of it's owned by, I think it's owned by Southampton, yeah. But they don't have a congregation large enough to sustain it. So we're gonna cross over the street, we're gonna hit on the north side, and we're gonna head east. So the first house we have across the street, and we kind of talked about, so just west of this is the Bridgehampton National Bank, or Dime. The original building, and the year that was built was 1980s. I don't have a picture of it here, but so there's been talk about perhaps that bank being part of the district. So another thing to really think about. But this is Judge 2214 Montauk Highway. This is Judge Halsey's house, Hugh Halsey's house. It's just a beautiful house. It's kind of remained. It has been added onto, but through the early centuries, and you can see from the road, you can see some of its earlier eastern wing. And this is Judge Halsey, Hugh Halsey. Is a very interesting man. He went to Williams College. He was a school teacher in Watermill. He attended Yale. He went on to become a Suffolk County judge, a presidential elector, New York State senator. He had 3 sons and a daughter. 2 of his sons, Dr. Charles Halsey and Sidney Halsey, both died during the Civil War. The one son was a surgeon during the war. He died of disease in one of the hospitals that he was working at. His younger brother decided to enlist. And he ended up dying as well. I think they both died of disease, which was pretty much the lead cause of death for the Northern soldiers.
This house was, or this land at least, was purchased in 1834 by Hugh Halsey. He had, as Julie said, been active in the community in 1822 and 1824 and 1822. He was a New York State Assemblyman as well, so he was an active politician. And before that, this property belonged to a family named Gelston, and I think Deacon Gelston it was, and he was a collector of duties for the Port of New York. And he got into financial trouble, I guess, and his property was liquidated, it appears, and I think that's how Hugh Halsey got a hold of this.
Property.
But the house may have earlier structural elements in it. The descendant of Hugh Halsey who lives in the house
Yep.
presently,
Yep.
and has indicated that she thought that the house may go back to the late 1700s, parts of it,
Parts of it,
late 1700s, at its core. And it may be that this house was treated like other houses, an older core was wrapped in a new, very stylistic, wrapping.
Yeah, yeah.
And, but it is a very impressive house. Unfortunately, there's a lot of landscaping. This is right on Montauk Highway where traffic and noise are very present. And so a fairly high fence with a lot of landscaping elements sit in front of it, but it certainly is a distinguished house.
Yeah, it's a nice picture up there. Yeah, and then it's also interesting, so Hugh Halsey's granddaughter taught school to young girls in the house, in his law office. So had another job as a private school. The next building, 2228 Montauk Highway, is not contributing. And I point out just that, there were older structures that had been torn down to build this. So it's just a good point to remember that we're losing things. And then the next, so then we're crossing over Butter Lane, still heading east, and there's a corner, it's vacant land, and the Bridgehampton Inn, which is the next property. They bought it.
That 2252 vacant parcel, I believe, is before the planning board for
Is she doing,
some site plan
okay.
approval, but I'm not sure of it,
Not sure.
yeah. It's just
Yeah.
something for us to
To get,
be aware of and keep our eye on, because right next door
is Loaves and Fishes Cook Store, which is attached to the inn, which I believe was done with not a, certificate of appropriateness and all of that stuff.
It's not a landmark.
What's that?
It's not a landmark.
Oh, no, it's a new building.
But why would it need a COA?
No, I'm just saying
Oh, okay.
that the appropriateness, nobody, I don't believe the board, did you,
we did not review.
you didn't review it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
But I was told Cinderella's has bought that property.
The corner piece?
The
Yeah,
office
I don't,
piece.
I heard that it was possibly for sale, but I didn't know. Sibylla, who owns, Van Kempen, who owns the inn, originally bought it in 2019. So we're not sure where we're at with that piece of, that empty property. But the inn itself, is contributing structure. That's an interesting, this is Gurdon Corwith's home, and he is the brother of William Corwith, which is the Bridgehampton Museum's house that's a little bit further. The Corwiths owned all of the land from Butter through to the back. I mean, they owned, I think,
All the way to Lumber Lane almost.
yeah, and they bought it from John Wick, who owned what's another, this gets really confusing because all these houses and landmarks are gone, but they bought it in the early, in the late 1700s, and so Gurdon got the western part of the property that, as it got whittled down a little bit, so he owned to the left, the west property, and he built this house. And they attributed it to, he would have been like 5 when he built it, so but it is a beautiful structure, Greek Revival style, and it has, so it stayed in the Corwith family up through the 1960s, 70s. And it was kind of the Corwith sisters. Gurdon Corwith had about 10 children. 6 of them were men. They all went west to Galena, Illinois, made a fortune in pig lead. Their cousin Charles Rogers, who was also a founder of the library in Bridgehampton, Hampton Library, they all went out to Galena, Illinois. He went out first in 1833 and said, "You have to come out here. There's 50 log cabins, and there's 100 women," and so all Gurdon's sons said, "We're coming." And they all went out and made a fortune. They would in today's dollars, they would all have been multimillionaires on the pig lead. Charles Rogers came back and worked on Wall Street, so he brokered the lead that they were excavating out in Galena, Illinois, and they all went on to live in Chicago and great wealth. And William Corwith, so the Bridgehampton Museum's Corwiths, they were brothers, and so all these men were cousins. The William Corwith sons did not go, and did not have a long lives like their cousins did. So, and this was also when we get down to the Topping Rose House, which Henry Corwith owned. He is a son of one of the gentlemen that went out to Galena, Illinois, and he owned the Topping Rose House, and he owned this. This was considered the Corwith homestead. So it's great history in this house. And then 2272 was an accessory building to the inn. So it was an accessory building that was out in the back. So if you look on Main Street, set back. And then this has a little structure that's right on the road. I didn't even put it in here because it is.
Now, on that, you have a contributing resource. My opinion is that it shouldn't be a continuing resource.
Okay.
Because the building has been modified quite dramatically, and the site itself is also possesses a glass box
Right,
Yes.
that's the other structure.
on the
We're just-
outside. So my sense is that its real value has been thoroughly diminished.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't exclude anything that
Right. Yeah.
may or may not be, and that would be something that you would all decide. Then the Newman Village Plaza is a non-contributing structure.
Yeah, this is an office complex, condominium complex, and there are 6 units. Now, most of them, I think 5 of them are commonly held by a real estate interest that bought out the separate interest over the past 3 or 4 years. And in the back, there are, I believe, 9 or 10 residential units in this condominium. And it's all new.
I mean,
Just as
yeah.
a point, Newman,
Newman is the
family.
house that you landmarked on Narrow Lane and Lumber on the corner, the one that
Right.
had all,
the Arthur
issues.
Newman Sr., that Arthur Newman Jr. was the landmark house on Lumber Lane.
Reverend.
Reverend Arthur Newman married a Corwith sister.
He married Isabel Newman, whose mother was a Corwith.
Okay,
Yeah,
right.
so Isabella Newman's mother was a Corwith. She married because
Right,
everybody
so-
out in Chicago, she married a gentleman that had all these, was a huge merchant in Chicago. Isabella would come to Bridgehampton, to her grandparents' home to vacation, and she met the Reverend Arthur Newman, and they married. He was a young pastor, reverend at the Presbyterian Church. I think he was newly installed, and they met and married. but that's where the Newman name comes from. Bridgehampton Post Office, 2322 Montauk Highway, non-contributing.
It's the post office has rented it since I think it was built.
Built, yeah.
In the 1960,
Yeah.
probably about 1960, I think.
The post office in Bridgehampton has moved, I think, 6 times. And all in the buildings, some of which are still standing, house the post office. It was in Starbucks
It
building.
almost deserves recognition because Bridgehampton does not have any postal delivery. So if you lived in Bridgehampton with an address, you had to go to the post office.
Yeah.
And you had to get burned by your neighbors if they had something against you at the post office. But anyway, it's, you know, it's new and it really isn't part of the great symbol of the post office, so.
No. Moving along, so 2350 Montauk Highway. So this is the Queen of the Most Holy Rosary Catholic Church and Rectory. The church was designed by F. Burrell Hoffman, very well-known, celebrated architect. He built an enormous estate, I believe, in an island down in Florida, and it's now, I had it earlier in my head and I'd forgotten.
He was a society architect.
Yeah.
And spent 4 months of the year in Paris, 4 months of the year in New York, and 4 months of the year in Palm Beach, and designed what is now, I think, the Miami Museum of Art, but it was once a luxury estate.
Yeah.
I think they call it Vicasa. I'm not.
Yeah, the name is,
Vizcaya?
Pardon?
Vizcaya?
Vizcaya, maybe it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it is.
Right.
Yep.
It's an island, absolutely
Yeah.
beautiful.
yeah, striking. So obviously he spent a little time here in Bridgehampton and designed this church. And then so again, this was another casualty of the 38 hurricane. It did have a steeple. It was never put back on. Small steeple, but was never put back on. Lots of interesting things about the Catholic Church and how they got their land and how they were able to build, which I found that Henry Corwith, who owned the Topping Rose House, he donated, I think he gave $100 to the building fund and said he wished that he could give more, but the Catholics deserved their own church on Main Street as well. So, but I think they had to, a couple of different people had to sell the land.
There was there was an intermediate cloaking the real purpose of the sale of the land, because there was general hostility to having the presence of a Catholic symbol on Main Street, Bridgehampton, in the early 1900s, and I think the intermediate buyer was a Hildreth.
Hildreth.
Yeah, and then transferred to Raymond McGee and Paul Roselle. There are names that pop up in Bridgehampton history, and you'll hear them as we go down Main Street further. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, and then the rectory was built around the same time. I found an very early photo of it, of the rectory building, and you can tell because of the window that's up at the top. Okay, so the next structure, 2368 Montauk Highway, that is the William Corwith Bridgehampton Museum House. This was built, there was an original salt box on this property. That's the building that the Corwith, Henry Corwith first bought from Captain Edward Howell. Yeah. And then it was once Henry Corwith died in 1821, his son William, who inherited this house and property, he built this structure. So we've done a lot of research on this. We say about 1825 this was done. And I'm not sure if there's any, I don't believe there's any of the original salt box in this. I think this is all 1825. What's interesting about this, though, the rear addition that's off the back, that's the original Methodist church that was built in 1820. So William Corwith bought it and moved it to the back of his house.
The house had been used as a boarding house in
Yeah,
the
the
boarding
Corwitz-
house era.
Yeah, the Corwiths did a lot. So they're the second, so the one surviving son of William Corwith, William Augustus Corwith, ran it as a boarding house. And of course, William Augustus Corwith had 3 surviving daughters. Most of them lived well into their 80s and 90s. And this house was actually donated to the Hampton Library as another building for them to use. They didn't have any need for it. So for, I think, $1, they rented it to, or they sold it with first right of refusal to the Bridgehampton Historical Society at the time. So if they ever tried to sell it, I think the Bridgehampton Library can buy it back for $30,000 or something like that. I don't know how long those things last in deeds. I would assume that the library should remember that's technically they could be their property again. So and so then all of the structures. So the 2 barns in the back are non-contributing, although their history of farming equipment, engine runs, and all the community activities that happened in those 2 barns. The wheelwright shop was moved there
From
from
Sagaponic.
Strong's, from Sagaponic
Yeah.
on Wainscott in the corner, and that was moved in. What do I have here? So that was moved. There's a corn crib, there's an outhouse, and they were all moved to the site in the late 20th century. And the Bridgehampton Jail is also on that property as well. In the back, it's the little square concrete building, and that used to be behind Main Street, just a little bit further down, kind of down one of the back alleys the jail stood, and that was moved to the property. I included off of Main Street, 23 Corwith Avenue, which was built in 1908. It was the first, not the first, but, well, I consider it the first fire department. The Bridgehampton Fire Department used another building to house their apparatus and have meetings, but this was the first building that was built for the fire department. And then in 1924 through 1980, it was sold to the Bridgehampton First Baptist Church, was out of this building as well. And they bumped up out the front at some point from the original 1908 structure. And it is now the Dan Flavin Art Institute. They moved in there in 1983. And he's kept it as it was when the Baptist Church moved and built a new congregation on the Turnpike. And then,
Was it a black congregation?
yes, yep. Yeah. So then the next structure on Corwith Avenue, this was a commercial business, but it is on 1930 aerials. I don't know what it was before, what was housed in this large garage. Ed, do you have any idea?
I don't know the history of that building.
It's just kind of a stucco. And then we go kind of back up onto Montauk Highway to the corner. and that's 2400 Montauk Highway. And that's the former Sinclair Service Station Garage. It was built in 1934. And now it's currently the home of 3 commercial businesses.
It maintains its original, even some of the original kind of industrial 30s windows in
Yeah.
it, and was also kind of a focal point for some of the racing
Yeah,
crowd
yes.
in Bridgehampton.
So the Bridgehampton road racing, big part of its, the hamlet's history. And they did a lot of, cars were serviced there. The next property is 2402 Montauk Highway, formerly World Pie, and I don't know the name of the new establishment that's there. So this is a Tudor revival style building operated as Bobby Van's restaurant for several decades. The business was originally known as Basso's Restaurant, opened by Frank and Celestina Basso in the 1920s. The structure features a bracketed cornice and half timbering. It is parged with stucco. Originally a one-story building, the storefront was built out to the sidewalk, and large glass plate windows were added in March 1929. It's interesting, this is one of the Bassos, when it was first just a one-story structure. When Prohibition hit, they went to Hampton Bays. Another family, the Cavagnano's, came in, Cavaneros, and they ran it just as a upstanding establishment. And then once Prohibition was over, the Bassos came back. So it's kind of an interesting, kind of the first restaurant, I would say, on Main Street. Moving next into, this is another interesting building, if it's contributing or not contributing. So 2408 Montauk Highway, the structure, the part of the structure on the left-hand side, on the west portion, that's all new. The 2 peaks are, one, the center, the left peak is, I think, replicated to match the other. But if you go around the back of this building, this is the original Presbyterian parsonage that was technically, across the street. They were all homes, residential buildings, and it was just turned around and stuccoed and all that. But the building that's underneath there. And this also was one of the post office. This was in here.
The post office is really skinny little, very small building.
That might have been a
It was right
different.
next to World Pie, I think. Ed?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Oh, one of the post offices existed right next to World Pie.
It was.
Yeah, so Country Gear, I think, was where the post office
It was located, I think the door access was located right here, as I recall, at one point. Yeah.
Yeah. And
that-
then
where the-
this part of Main Street gets a little confusing on which pieces are which, street number. There's been a lot of movement. A lot of these structures have now were freestanding and now are all
Wall to
attached.
wall.
Yeah. So 2414 Montauk Highway, this was on the 1902 map. This shows this as a little storefront, just single story. And then right next to it, to the east, is a 1.5-story front gable commercial building. This, we believe, was constructed in the mid-19th century. It is in photographs on the south side of the street, part of the whole Sanford, row of buildings and commercial enterprise there. I'm just trying to, it was like their parts storage for their plumbing business. And then it was moved, and you can see it in the early 1900s in the road racing photographs. It's standing there on the side, and I think it was converted into a store in 1925 by Raymond McGee. So he was one of the, with the Catholic Church, he bought up a lot of the properties on the north side of the street, and like the parsonage, there was another house that was on Main Street as well that he moved. It is now it's in Sagaponack. That was the Van Scoy house that he moved that. 2422, this was built prior to 1902 and was part of the Cook's estate. And again, it's, has a built-out front for store. And then the next set of buildings is 2422 and 2424. This is a single-story brick, 3-store front commercial building constructed in 1930. This is where Bohack's supermarket chain was. It also housed the Bridgehampton Post Office in the 1930s to the late 60s. So it's actually 3 parcels in there. And then the next structure is 2426 Montauk Highway, and this was built after 1941. And still,
This building used to be the headquarters of the Bridgehampton News and the Robert Halleck real estate operation in Bridgehampton. I suspect it might have been designed by Arthur Newman Jr.
right,
But I never found any kind
I
of
haven't found anything
proof of it, yeah.
conclusive.
But it would have been about 1950 about it, yeah.
Yeah. So then we have parking lot, and then the structure on the corner is Thayer's Hardware. And this was built about 1952 and then altered in the 1980s. And it's been a familiar landmark and local business, and it's been in the same family for decades.
Is the bathroom building on the parking lot, is that an old building?
No. According to the facade easement list in 2008 and a Hamlet study, architect Arthur Newman, the Presbyterian minister's son, designed the east portion of the store. So this old, great architectural structure. So that was designed by Arthur Newman Jr., who was an architect. So local architect, local family with a hardware store for decades. Saved. Okay, so then the next buildings, 2442 Montauk Highway. The bottom building of the two photographs was originally Raina's fruit stand and market, which was pre-1930, and that is, I don't know how well you can see it in the photograph up there, but there's a peak behind that blue awning, and that was what Raina's fruit stand looked like. It was just a clapboard structure, and then this brick facade was moved out, was added after 1950.
I can't get the,
Can't make,
anyway, yeah. We'll have to look at the
can
small
see it.
print.
It's
Yeah.
visible, yeah.
You can see it.
it's hard to see, but there are postcards of Raina and photographs of Raina's fruit stand, Oop. And you can see that the peak in the roof.
Hump. Yeah.
And I'm not sure if the top photograph, if this was actually built part at the same time as the hardware store. That's also something that I haven't been able to find anything conclusive.
Oop. We didn't capture the new annex in the images
Oh,
that
no, yeah, not in the
are
image.
associated with the classic store here.
The hardware store? You mean
Yeah, yeah.
the new building that's built, set back just a little bit? I think I mentioned it, but it's not in the photograph. Despite,
Oh, okay, let's get back to,
so the next building is 2446 Montauk Highway. This was built in 1916. It was formerly a food market. It was the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, the AMP. Now Sotheby's, this two-story four-bay building exhibits elements of both neoclassical and Tudor revival styles with a dentil cornice over the shop front and half-timbered stucco appearance on the upper story. And there are photographs of this, and it looks, except for, some of the awning, the rest of it has stayed that way. And I guess in 1916, this was owned by the East Hampton Lumber Company. Okay, so then this is another one of how is this contributing? 2450 Montauk Highway, this was built about 1875, and it was originally the store of Tiffany and Hunting. Tiffany was a merchant in Sag Harbor. He built a house on Lumber Lane, so his house became the Hendrickson Farm. It's the old farmhouse. It's right north of the railroad tracks. That was built by Nathan Newton Tiffany, and he had been a chandler, so he outfitted whaling ships in Sag Harbor, moved up to Bridgehampton, built that house on Lumber Lane, went into business with Captain James R. Hunting, who was a whaling captain, was the second or third owner rather of the Nathaniel Rogers house, very prominent whaling captain. After he retired from whaling, they went into business together in 1875. In the early 1880s, the store was leased for a 5-year period to Edward A. Hildreth and Albert Topping. This partnership dissolved in 1882 when Thomas J. Hand replaced Topping as junior partner with Hildreth. So it was called, this is Hildreth and Hand. In the report, there's a photograph of the original building. The shop was a Main Street staple until it changed hands in 1923. It housed the post office from about 1897 to 1920. Today, the original Italianate style of structure, including decorative gable, window, and eave brackets, can be seen. However, a modern single-story shop front addition has changed the appearance of the shop. When you walk in, this had been the Bridgehampton Pharmacy. So the pharmacist from East Hampton moved in to this not too long ago. And it was all the old flooring and just really beautiful old store. But now I think it's antiques, I think. And then, of course, so the structure to the right, that's just an addition of wing, the Bridgehampton Deli. The next structure, 2454 Montauk Highway. Again, same thing where one story built out, commercial part added to the front of this 1880s former Hannah Hand and Clara Downs house. During the 1930s and 40s, this building was the home of the Fireside Inn, who was run by Mrs. Cavalier, where she served lunch, tea, and dinner. Again, same issue of these built out front facades. And then 2462, which is the next structure, Again, this is, there is a old house tucked behind this front facade that was added, that was built up in the 1980s. But this was the home of G.F. Halleck in 1894 to 1902. And then his wife owned it after, and then sold in the 1980s. And this may have been, which I'm trying to determine still, this may have been the original Methodist Church parsonage. So basically, the churches were on one side of the street and the parsonages were on the north side. You can see, if you walk down the alley, the old structure that's there. I've not been in, I don't believe I may have been in one or two of the structures, but you really just in that front built-out section. 2466 Montauk Highway. This building was constructed in 1880 as a Halleck's Insurance. The single-story front gable commercial structure is faced in stucco. It features a hip roof, porch, large shop windows, and 3 light door transom, little to no change. The structure looks exactly as it did. I believe it was just copboard and it's been stuccoed over. It's a great little building. I don't know what's going on here. All the commercial enterprise that was in here, this antiques, Barbara Trujillo, that I think that's all, they've moved out. Let's see, so the next structure, 2468 Montauk Highway, this was constructed in 1880 by E.J. Hildreth. He sold sporting goods, confectionaries, postcards, stationery. He repaired bicycles. So this structure was originally looked just like the Halleck structure above. And then in 1912, he doubled it and built up. So the structure that's on the left side was the twin of the one above. So the one on the east, the east door where Pierre's restaurant is now, that was the original twin of the Halleck's Insurance. And then he just doubled it and built up. And it's, book fell apart. Barbara, I won't give you this. This is just falling apart. So the next property is 2478 Montauk Highway, and this is the Hampton Library. Originally built as a one-story building in 1876 through the donations of William Gardner and Charles Rogers, who I mentioned earlier. When it opened, it had the largest collection on Long Island, east of Brooklyn. So at the time in 1800s, books were housed on a shelf in a store in somebody's attic, and this was the first library built as a library through the generous donations of Charles Rogers and William Gardner. They were brother-in-laws. They married sisters. Or rather, William Gardner married Charles Rogers' sister, and they donated the money and made this a standalone library. And then in 1894, the second story was added. So we're at the little piece that you can see on the left-hand side and the main piece are the original structure. Everything to the east on the right is all new, and as you all know, it was completely expanded out the back. But there are elements. I worked at the library. I was a local history librarian there for years, and there are elements within it of the original structure that was built in 1876. 2486 Montauk Highway. This was constructed in 1899. It was originally a drugstore. There was a structure here in 1898. There was a terrible fire in 1898 that destroyed the first structure. The fire was so terrible that this building, the original building was, wasn't worth saving at that point, so all efforts were to save the Bridgehampton Library, the Hampton Library, and then the Hampton Library donated money towards a new fire truck for the Bridgehampton Fire Department for saving their building. So this structure here was built in 1899, a year after the fire had destroyed the first pharmacy. And it's pretty much, I believe it's all that built-out storefront has been there for a while. The east and west portions of those front wings maybe later additions, but not too much later. 2488 Montauk Highway. Everybody knows this is a Starbucks. This building was constructed in 1902, and it was originally operated as Loper's store. He was a grocer. He actually started out in Sagaponack and then moved to Bridgehampton on Main Street, and built this. It looks quite different than it did in 1902 when it was built. In 1910, the newly formed Bridgehampton National Bank had a wing. So when you go into Starbucks, there's the big vault. That's from the original Bridgehampton National Bank. In 1926, the building was wrapped in brick. So the original building is underneath there. If you look to on the west side of the building, you can see the original structure. It just has this new brick wrapping that was done in 1926. And then the post office was located in this building as well in the 1920s and 30s. But it's a great building. And we've lost a couple of structures now to a parking lot. And then the next structure, I went down just one down on Lumber Lane, so it's on it's behind the parking lot and the new structure that was built on the corner. And this is 24 Lumber Lane. This is Dr. Edgar B. Mulford's house, and he started practicing medicine in 1878. And it should be noted that Dr. Mulford did not lose a single patient during the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918-1919. He warned folks not to travel, so he didn't lose anybody that was a patient of his in Bridgehampton. And
Is that a residential property?
Yes.
And are the residents going to wonder why their house is included in the downtown historic district? Because it's on Lumber Lane.
Right, so we went off a little bit on both to include a structure that was historically significant.
Okay.
It's basically part of the intersection area for Montauk Highway, Sag Harbor Turnpike, Lumber Lane, and Ocean Road. And on all of those corners are historic properties, Topping Rose, Nathaniel Rogers, and the Mulford House, and the Gardner house at the apex of
Yeah,
Lumber
39
Lane
Lumber Lane, which
and
is the
Turnpike.
next page. Which is circa, so 39 Lumber, which is in the triangle behind the big holly tree. So that house was built about 1830. Greek Revival style, was built by Captain William Topping, and in 1855 became the home of Dr. John Lyon Gardner. And then in 1891 it became the home of Dr. Silas Corwith, all prominent figures. Dr. John Gardner, he went on to build Dulce Dunham, which is the house up off of Brick Hill Road, up behind Scuttle Hole Road, up on the hill with the big tower. That's Christy Brinkley's home, but that was this was one of his homes prior to that. And then one Bridgehampton Sag Harbor Turnpike, built in 1842 by Judge Abraham Topping Rose. Judge Rose raised his family here in the house. There was an earlier structure that I believe when you're in the basement you can see the original foundation. The original structure that stood here, he moved to where St. Anne's Church is now, and that house. That was the Atlantic House, and that is since gone on Main Street. But Judge Abraham Topping Rose built this house, and so he owned it up into, he sold it a few times. It was, this house is interesting because it was owned by, and now his name is just, Samuel Wilkson, in 1858 it was owned by, up until the 1858 map, Judge Rose's family was still in there. In 1873, Samuel Wilkson was the owner. He was a newspaper man. He was the son of the mayor of Buffalo, and he lived in here. He was one of the first kind of summer residents in Bridgehampton, where he lived in the house outright. It wasn't a boarding house at that time. After his ownership, William Gardner, who I mentioned earlier, who was one of the founders of the Hampton Library, he owned the property. And in 1894, William Gardner's adopted daughter, Frances Bell, owned the house. And then in 1902, she sold it to Henry Corwith, who was part of the whole Corwith clan. And he owned it up until his death in the 1940s, and then it became a succession of inns and antique shops, and now it is the Topping Rose House. And the only thing that has been changed on the structure, they kind of brought it back to some of the earlier photographs that they had. The only thing that changes is that they removed the wing that goes down, that's the elevations on the west elevation down the turnpike. That back addition that's brand new. And I think,
We have
So then we have,
Hull Lane and Ocean Road.
yeah, so then we go down Ocean Road a little. There are about 4 structures that are at the top of Ocean Road. So they're just south of the little triangular commons. So 40 Ocean Road, this was the home and shop of James Havens, well-known and respected blacksmith. And this building was built around 1820, but it was drastically altered in the 2000s. So we don't consider this a contributing structure. The integrity is gone. In 46 Ocean Road, this is a circa 1850, a 2-story shingle-clad residence, likely dating to the second quarter of the 19th century. The 4-bay facade includes an entry with a 6-panel door flanked with pilasters. The window contains 6/6 light double-hung sash. It's on the 1858 map all the way through. It's a contributing structure. Has not been changed. And the Havens kind of owned all these 2 properties. The last house that I'll get to, which is 20 Hull Lane, was also part of the Havens property, and it actually stood, so the top house and the yellow house and then the white house stood behind the 2 of them, and then they just turned it around and put it on Hull Lane. So that was the third of the 3 Havens houses. We do have a photograph of it in its original spot.
Julie, don't forget to mention the house, go back 1 slide.
Oh, and then the house at 52 Ocean, Which-
No, that was the bottom one.
the
there.
bottom one, yeah, so that's
Oh, okay.
52 Ocean Road. That was built in 1860 by Silas Halsey. I think it's Silas Halsey. And it had been altered likely around 1900 with the introduction of a wall dormer on the front roof slope and a hip roof porch. It retains its wood shingle cladding. And this was the home of the Bridgehampton operator. All calls, the telephone company, all calls went through here.
We'd come home and, I pick up the phone and, hello, is your mother there? And I said, yeah, she all right, she fine, you know.
Yeah, so yeah, I think if you picked up the phone and called the operator at Bridgehampton, you could learn a lot about what was going on in town. So those are the structures. I think there are 58 in all, I believe. Bridgehampton wasn't just a bypass from Southampton to East Hampton. The railroad came to Bridgehampton in 1870. Bridgehampton was the terminus of the line for 25 years. That's as far as the train went, unless you took the scoot into Sag Harbor. The remainder of the line east wasn't constructed until 1895. So Bridgehampton was kind of the place to be. Everybody got off at the train there and got in wagons or, to go further eastward. So the downtown area is pretty special. And there's still quite a bit of contributing structures that preserve its community and its place in history, for sure, in the town of Southampton. Any other questions? And I will get everybody a copy of the draft.
Great job.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Julie, it's an immense amount of work and preparation that you've put together for this project, and I certainly know, I know how much goes into it, and I think the town has benefited enormously from this work that you've done.
Right, and to that end, I mean, you've helped me with a lot of this, and this is the history is my wheelhouse, but the architecture and the standards and the do's and don'ts and making it a historic structure, that's I put that in your hands to see if we can put this together.
So, before you can stay there for a minute, because
Sure.
I just want to bring up the other buildings on Main Street that are a matter of, I think, some interest here. The one additional building from what you proposed is that of 2200 Montauk Highway. This building is, quote, not old, built in 1997 by the Bridgehampton Bank, which sought to move from its original place where the Starbucks coffee building we just saw was located. And it was designed to be an impressive piece of architecture, gateway architecture for a historic hamlet. Not so historic anymore, but at the time in 1997, much more so, and to emulate the architectural characteristics of the Bridgehampton School, which is also of kind of a colonial revival style, as is this. It's very prominent. I don't know how many of you have driven along Montauk Highway and into Bridgehampton, but it is the most prominent visual element as you come into town to enjoy its red lights. And the fact is that Bridgehampton Bank 2 years ago merged with Dime Community Bank, and the headquarters of the combined bank is now in Hauppauge, and this bank is, I think, rents office space for various parties as a converted thing. This used to be the headquarters of the Bridge Bank Corporation. But I believe, one, it's significant, one, because it's of its familiar location, which is one of the criteria for landmark and contributing resource characteristics. Two, it's significant because of the economic history of the locale. The Bridgehampton Bank was a bank founded by Main Street small-time businessmen and farmers, and grew for 120 years in town. It was a significant bank that was locally controlled and had its way until the more energetic parts of modern capitalism required it to merge in order to stay alive. As you know from recent discussions, banks eat each other up in a competitive world. So, it also has the distinctive architectural style of a colonial classical style. So I'm recommending it that it be considered a contributing resource for the historic district that we have. With that, we have some tweaking to do with respect to updating the draft that was done finished in 2021
2021.
and under different conditions. As I mentioned, some buildings have disappeared and the code has changed. So we will do some tweaking together on this. But I would ask that you endorse this as the prospective Bridgehampton Historic District Phase 1 that will allow us to proceed to produce a final document and prepare the information to be sent out to both the property owners as well as eventually forwarding it to the town board for a recommendation for historic district. So if that's a consensus of the board, we have that, could it be made in a motion to endorse the presentation made with subject to amendments as Julie and I see fit to provide the information to move forward for the historic district. So, Vicky moves, Jeff seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye, raise your hand. Aye. Okay, thank you. And I think that provides for the formalities that we need to go forward with this.
Great.
Our guests have been observers. Do you have anything more you want to add?
I have a question for you. At what point do we put the brakes?
If you want to speak, maybe speak at the
Yeah.
microphone so that. And introduce yourself for the recorded audience.
Yeah, okay. Julie Burmeister, Bridgehampton resident, Ocean Road. At what point can we put the brakes on demolition? In other words, the word gets out that the historic district and people panic and say, well, better make the changes now because we won't, won't be able to do it afterwards. At what point in our procedure here can we put the brakes on?
Like a moratorium.
Yeah, like a moratorium.
Well, that comes at the time the town board receives a recommendation from us to, you're talking about, quote, the moratorium.
Well,
aspect.
I don't know what the formal word
Right,
is,
yeah.
but yes.
So, as this goes forward, when the town board receives a recommendation, there'll be a notice published, there'll be a moratorium instituted. During that time, the town board gives consideration to the designation of a district. And that presumably would then come about, which would provide for the subsequent review of demolitions and alterations to the buildings on Main Street by the Landmarks Board here.
Okay. So there isn't really a time, see, you gave me a flow chart there.
Okay, I thought I had sent out one before in an email, and maybe I can dig it out again and send it out.
Well, we're just anxious. I hate to think that there are a lot of people here, once they get the news, they'll say, oh boy, we better get
Right,
get changing things that we want to change.
yeah. So it'll probably be still a couple weeks before we get the final,
Okay,
final product available to send on.
yeah.
Ed, do the property owners and the town board get the report simultaneously? Or does there have to be some notice to property owners in advance of the town board?
Once the town board receives a recommendation, it'll be referred to the planning board, it'll be set up for a public hearing by which interested parties can be heard at that time. So the real precipitating event is the town board receiving the report from
Okay, that's
the
good.
recommendation of the Landmarks Board.
And hopefully a moratorium could be
Yeah. Yeah.
put in place at that time.
Yeah, thank you. 'Cause I have no idea how.
And could that be within the next month?
Pardon?
Could that be within the next month?
It's possible.
I thought you just said a couple of weeks.
That's what I'm trying to.
I'm holding you, you said a couple of weeks, 2 weeks.
I will,
Yeah, scheduling is, something of a problem getting things together, and some things may be more easily done by Zoom and some other forms of communication to get some work done, so. But it's on its way.
I want you all to know that Julie knows more about my family than I do.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
A couple
a little
questions.
further down Ocean Road, Julie.
Tom?
Yeah, I'm Tom Watson. I have a house in Bridgehampton. It's in downtown. So I really have a couple questions for Julie. So I live next to that Mediterranean restaurant on School Street. Okay, so, I mean, the restaurant's in what I call the commercial district. So why isn't that building, like, included in the historic, even though it might be non-contributing,
Yeah.
it's still downtown?
I actually have that as a note to
Right, we-
add that.
Okay.
We talked about going down.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
around. the corner.
Yeah.
There are a couple of interior site parcels behind the south side of Main Street. I think one is even landlocked, but
Yeah.
it abuts the Presbyterian Church, and the town has that parking lot there as well. But that restaurant across from the community house, or it's a restaurant building with like living space above, but that also I had included in my thoughts that should be included.
We were working off originally it was just a Main Street. I think that was what Ed had originally kind of outlined, and then as we were going, we kind of dipped in a
Okay.
little bit. And I think we had issue with the parking lot. There was a little bit of an issue on how to get it in the district.
And can the parking lot be included in the district?
The
It
parking,
goes-
yeah, the parking lot, since the parking lot could be altered in some fashion, and it's likely to be altered as all kinds of things happen.
It's happening.
They could have
yeah.
if you have charging stations in a parking lot in the future, you may have a small power substation being erected
They have it
someplace.
already
Yeah.
in the,
So-
and this is my concern, because I would like it included, in the district, because, they put this electric charger station there. It's got these green glowing neon lights all around it. Does that fit into a downtown historic district? No. So I hope parking lots and everything can be included so that that can be controlled, because that doesn't fit in a downtown district, in my opinion.
Right, I'm glad for your testimony to that effect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I can see it from my bedroom windows,
Yeah.
and I don't like it. I mean, when my privet hedge, greens up, I don't see it, but it's ugly. It just doesn't
What
belong in
happens
a
to be
downtown
dark
district.
skies?
And I'm just amazed that the
That-
township of Southampton even allowed it. I can't believe it, but that's,
Be under the dark sky.
it's
yeah, there's a
violating
lot of
the dark
issues,
sky.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Because these are going to be popping up all over.
Thanks for the
They're going to be
warning on
popping
that,
up in
Sag
Sag
Harbor.
Harbor, all over. And if this is if this is the standard, these green neon, modern, ugly lights, I mean, we're going down the wrong path.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know, if something is non-contributing, is it still going to be controlled at least in terms of the paint color and this and that, whatever?
Yeah,
Yes.
paint
Okay,
color,
well,
not so
whatever.
much, but
Not so,
yeah.
but there'll be some control over the
It'll be-
non-contributing.
It'll be
Yes.
reviewed.
Okay,
The contributing properties will have certain potential benefits
Right.
in terms of, if they're commercial properties, a contributing resource would qualify for some tax abatement if they improve the structure
Okay.
according to approved plans.
right.
So, non-contributing, they don't qualify for that, but they still will be subject to approval for buildings.
Right.
I just want to show you the kinds of things that, across from the bank, here that we talked about, this is a office building that has been erected
Right.
right across the street. It replaces a house that was once there. It's not particularly charming for the rest of the historic
It's
character.
better than the
of
two Farrell
the
buildings.
Main Street, right,
So,
and there's another building next door to it, that is also being, this was a one-story house and is now being made into office. This picture's 4 days old, so
Right.
it just tells you.
But that house wasn't anything to write home about.
No, it
Yeah.
was, it would not contribute.
Yeah, okay. I think
So, and then, this house is a office building, this is also non-contributing, close to Hildreth Lane, across from the bank building.
But I think that house should be used as an example of, it obviously was a single residential house. I don't know what business is in there, but you still see the bones of, I guess it's a 4/4 type of house. I don't know what the style is.
Right, well, and it's
but-
got interesting 2/1 windows still present on.
No, but
the-
I think for me, it's a nice example of,
or two-
all right, there's
two
still
over two.
something there that you can see, and, when somebody goes by it, you can see, all right, it's an older house, I don't know,
Yeah.
100 years, 80 years
But-
old.
Just on the west of the Cinderella parking lot, where is that?
That is, no, that's not,
Across from the bank.
house to the west is the old Dan's Paper House.
To the east is from Cinderella?
This house, this is the corner of Hildreth Lane, and it's a Safe Light Auto shop, auto window shop there. Next to it is the house that we were just talking about.
Okay, so that is in that little group of.
Right, yeah, so that's
And that's an
20,
improvement of what it
that's
used to be, in my
2167
opinion.
Montauk Highway. This is 21 73, 2183. This structure used to sit in front of the Wallace, the sculpture.
Yeah.
The wa-
I recognize
same real estate investor working along Main Street. So, and then this is the Citarella building. That's 2209. This is 20. This is an office building. Yeah, yeah. That is to the east of the Colette, to the west of the Colette building. That's across the street. There's the Colette Retail Building at the corner of Halsey Lane and Montauk Highway.
And that was a service
Yeah.
gas station at one time.
So this is to the east of Citarella's parking lot.
Okay.
This is the former headquarters of Dan's Papers before they moved to County Route 39. They were there till
I thought they were in,
1990s, I think.
the White House that you showed earlier that's been redone.
No.
This, your picture is much nicer than the actual,
Yeah.
right?
This is, it's obviously offices, you know, because the front door is gone. And you access the business end of the structure from the parking lot on the side. But it does have the bones and appearance of an earlier configuration, but it would be subject to regulation, even if it's non-contributing, so.
But that's not in the downtown historical district, that one.
That's next to Citarella's,
Yeah.
that would be included in it's a site, it's a property that would be included in the district, although it'd be non-contributing.
The district goes to Citarella's and
Yeah,
beyond?
well, that's down to Hildreth Lane from, we originally
Why would you
didn't
stop it?
include
Originally
that.
we went to
Why
the
wouldn't you
Yeah.
start it all the way
The-
down?
Exactly, so,
Methodist
Across from the
Church,
bank.
right, so
so Citarella's would not be in the downtown historic district?
if we extend it,
Or you might extend it,
Down to
okay.
Hildreth Lane, yeah. There
Okay.
are 7 properties down to
Gotcha.
Hildreth Lane, and there are on the other side.
The
where-
bank and then whatever's on the other side.
Right, Snake Hollow
Okay.
Road up to Butter Lane, there are 3 properties,
Okay,
so.
all right. And my last comment, I know it's a wish, but I don't know if there's anybody in the town government who could approach Mr. Farrell, okay, and say, okay, he's working on, it's still an empty lot, the house has come down, okay, and ask him, you know, can he design something that would be a little more in keeping with a historic district, instead of another third modern building? So that's, I ask, if somebody in town government could reach out to him and nicely ask him, out of the goodness of his heart, could he do that for us? So I'll end there, thank you.
Okay, all right, thanks, Tom. So, with that, I think we can put the historic district discussion to rest, and get back to the question of, let's see, do we have the agenda here? Did I have? Yes, there's the agenda, okay. 76 Main Street, West Hampton Beach Performing Arts Center. Stephanie, do you want to report on progress?
I'm not sure what progress we have. You sent your letter, and I sent my letter, and then I received a call from the town supervisor, who I'm thinking was perhaps discussing with Mayor Moore about this potential, landmarking of the Performing Arts Center. And I'm not sure where it has gone from there.
Well, the plan is that the town council's office will draft an intermunicipal agreement
Okay, so they were agreeing.
pertaining to the West Hampton Performing Arts Center, which would make the Landmarks Board responsible for the review of historic preservation and designate it appropriately so that it might qualify them in an application for community preservation funds.
Okay.
I haven't checked with the town attorney's office of late about who's doing it and when it's going to be done.
That
But
is the direction.
I do know that the Dix Windmill
Yes.
intermunicipal agreement was finally
Done.
done,
yeah.
and that is taking place. So I imagine it will conform in large measure to many of the aspects. I have not seen the intermunicipal agreement for the Dix Windmill, but I imagine whatever terms, probably a lot would be
Similar.
taken for the West Hampton Performing Arts Center. And apparently, the thrust is that if West Hampton Beach has other properties that they want to protect or preserve, that by intermunicipal agreement, that village trustees and the mayor would like the Landmarks Board of Southampton to carry out that function going forward.
Interesting.
So this will be an interesting change in behavior.
Yeah, I mean, the Village of North Haven might be interested. We have a couple of buildings that we may want to do that.
Do we need any more work?
Just one or two.
If we get to, have a lot of these, it may be worthwhile going back to the village and encouraging them to change their code, as we had previously discussed, to allow the village itself to landmark structures and to control things through their own architectural review board and building department. But until that happens, or until we get a lot of these,
Yeah.
I don't think we'll be doing it.
Well, I think the town authority and the village authority have come to an agreement, and that the agreement is, will be assigned the responsibility for that. And I don't know how long that will, last, but.
All right?
Okay, and then we have 149 South Country Road. Is there anything new on?
There's nothing new for us at this point. We have, made the recommendation to the town board that the building is worthy of landmarking. I know the owner has been in touch with Jackie Fenlon about moving forward with an easement, or at least getting an appraisal and setting up for an easement. I spoke to Jackie earlier today about this, so that I'm assuming that she's moving forward with getting that process underway.
Okay.
Answer to that. Yes. I think there's some thing where it's people wanting to know what the appraisal will come in at,
Yes.
and then to landmark. So I'm not sure if he's confused or somewhere along the line, because this had already been started with the previous owner, the new owners, it's kind of the cart before the horse. Does the CPF go out and do an appraisal on a house, give the owner this figure, and then they go and landmark it?
That's
where-
That's the understanding that the owner has, similar to the process that was done for 120 South Road in West Hampton,
Okay.
where this board deemed that house was worthy of landmarking.
Right.
But the owner definitely wanted to get a facade easement
Right.
that was at an acceptable level.
Right.
So once we deemed the house worthy of landmarking, that allowed CPF to move forward with
Okay.
obtaining the appraisal and developing an
Okay.
easement offer.
I think Jackie's not
She was,
sure of, do we then, if you say it can be landmarked, and then the CPF goes and gives an appraisal for the facade, the person could say, I don't want to it's not.
yes, and
So-
that's perfectly possible to happen if, let's say, the easement offer comes in at some very low amount, which I don't think is going to be the case with
No.
this particular house in this particular situation.
Right.
My expectation is that the easement would be at a level that, the offer would be at a level that the owner would find acceptable.
Right, so with the Coble property,
Mhm.
that's what you're referring to?
Yes,
Right, okay. So you gave the recommendation, the landmarks board gave the recommendation that the house was worthy of landmarking,
yes,
and that would go into the board, and then CPF did an appraisal
correct,
prior to her landmarking. So it
Correct.
was all kind of based contingent, okay.
yeah,
I didn't, it was before my time, so I wasn't sure how that all went,
yeah, that's
Or
the process.
the process, okay.
So that both steps moved forward, but we held off on finally landmarking until there was an easement offer on the table that was acceptable to the owner.
Okay.
And once that was the case, then we completed the landmarking and then did the,
Okay.
executed the
I'll
easement.
Relay that back to Jackie.
Yeah,
Okay. Other matters? Is there anything?
There was the matter of the Dick's Windmill,
Yes?
and the village contacted us and indicated that they are just about ready with their plans and designs for the windmill. And we need to get back to them and inform them as to how to
Right.
provide this information for review.
The question is, who's going to be the point person?
Yeah, I was thinking that it might be best if perhaps some of our architects could review these plans, because they're going to be quite detailed. And certainly as a non-architect person, I'm not probably in the world's best position to look at these things, but I think if we had a couple of the architecturally minded people on this board looking at this, it would be very helpful.
Do we have some volunteers?
I can't.
Okay.
I
That's,
have to recuse myself on that because my firm is working on some of the drawings.
Jeff, are you willing to,
Yeah.
and Bill? Okay. It certainly should be an interesting excursion into historic reproductions of sorts, so.
Yeah. I think, the full application should be provided, through the usual route to all of us, but
Right.
I'm sure I'll take a look through it, but as far as understanding all of the details, I think
Yeah, I think
an
that's
architect would be best.
Okay, so we'll put you on the mailing list for meeting notices when their architects and whoever else is involved in planning this plan to get together for.
I think the other thing that will need to happen is to follow the official process. The village will need to submit a certificate of appropriateness application with their plans. So, and they probably have to be informed about that.
Before or after it's done.
Yeah, well, nothing's happening yet. There's the 3 marshmallows sitting out on the lawn there. So.
Okay. Thank you for reminding me. I've forgotten completely about the
Yeah, it's,
communication from West Hampton. Yeah. Is there anything of note that you wanted to say, Susan, about any of the applications or anything like
Yeah,
that?
We're not, okay, for the ZBA, yeah, and I'll make this brief, and then after that, I'm thinking we'll take it off the agenda. And if there's something in particular, I'll alert people ahead, or I'll bring it up underneath that, because we're moving forward with the CLG and the other things, and this is maybe looking back, and we're gonna be need more time to look forward. So I'll briefly, for the ZBA, but I will keep eyeballing them and letting people know particularly. ZBA, the March 2nd was all repeats. On March 16th, we had 121 South Road, it's a AYB 1900, around 2015 for review. And they are going back because they appear to have made some changes that are for work done, like a second floor deck. So I
This is-
assume we should be getting it back.
Which address is this?
At 120 South Road, I think it was Normile.
Oh, yes, I saw the official notice out front. I was wondering why we hadn't gotten something from them.
So we may be getting that back again, but is it the ZBA for work that's already completed? But we did review it for some type of construction.
Yes, we did.
Previously,
Yeah.
so. But I assume that would be coming. For the planning board, February 22nd, of course, we had 14 Flying Point, the Diamond Farmhouse was on, plus 143 South
Right,
Ro-
which is
that we
a
had done, so
non-issue.
those were up. That was, yeah, February 23rd was again the cell towers for the West Hampton Cemetery and the 2055 Flanders. We requested information on both of those. Yours is still pre-submission, but the one down in West Hampton Cemetery, I sent it to David today. I'm not sure if you got that, David. That is, that it's for site plan signature, but we never got,
Yeah, there
we've never reviewed it.
I sent an email to planning and asked them if they had gotten the materials that you had asked for.
So you can let us know on that, but if it's going for a signature, it seems like maybe we should have reviewed it
earlier.
prior to them signing it.
I agree.
Since Stephanie in particular, I know we requested a couple times the elevations going back a year or so ago.
I think we did send those
couple
to you,
years.
right?
There was gonna be some additional visual simulations. There were a bunch original visual simulations, and then we asked for some additional ones, and I don't think we had
You're right.
received those.
So I throw that out because I know we had an email exchange and you explained that, yes, we should get it for review, even though nobody has to follow our suggestions, but we by code, I believe, we were supposed to review cell tower applications. On March 9th, there is one in, can't write my handwriting, I'll come back to that one. On the 23rd, the one for the Eastport Bible Church, it has the demo of 2 houses, and I know that's the planning board for the site plan. We reviewed one, and we maybe, I'm not sure if we had reviewed the second one or
The
not.
other ones I don't think are historic.
Okay, so if so, we will be getting that one back again. So I'll send a note out on the, on the 9th with the 2 turf barns. That was my turf. The F was left off of it, so I could, a couple turf barns for the golf courses, one for the Atlantic and the other up at National. So I'm not sure, in particular, the one on Atlantic, you were gonna check on the Scuttle Hole one if you were interested, where they were thinking of placing that. So, if you're interested, I just remind you that. So that's everything. And after this, we'll take it off the agenda and then
Okay.
move on to the other things. But I'll let people know anything of particular highlights. No 1940s summer cottages, but, okay,
All right, thank
that's
you.
all.
That's good, thank you. Annual landmark inspections, well, that's not an immediate concern of ours. We just do not have the capacity to do that, and the code gives the responsibility of enforcement of provisions to the building department, but that's not. Town-owned cemeteries was a matter we had discussed
Yeah.
before. That,
But just digging around, I didn't know if you wanted to discuss that further. I had brought that up to Stephanie, and then, and then you spoke about it. So the town owns 12 cemeteries. historic cemeteries that are inactive, that we care for, headstones. So my whole thing was, originally, one of the town-owned cemeteries, the Cuffey, Reverend Cuffey grave, which is in Hampton Bays, right on the railroad tracks, was given National Historic Registry back in 2008, I believe. And it was considered a multiple resource at the time, because they were supposed to do all the others. At that time, there were only 10 cemeteries, so the other 9 were to be added to that. But everybody in the Historic Burying Ground Committee thought all of them had historic registry. It wasn't until recently that somebody at North Sea asked me when that was given registry date, so I found out that they do not have, they are not on the list. So I had gone to the board and spoke with Ed about this, about landmarking them and giving them local town landmarking. But we discussed a little bit of Ed's thoughts about why it would be better just to go national, just get them national state registry, so.
Yeah, there are all kinds of aspects to what goes on in a cemetery in terms of,
Right, I mean, all of them are inactive, and hopefully there won't be anything going on in any of them.
right, but, well, I mean, for example, if restoration were to take place of something, or gravestones were vandalized, I mean, you
I
have,
mean, that's what we do, that's what we're
yeah,
always in the process of doing. People are always, unfortunately, going in and knocking headstones over, and so we perpetually are taking care of them, because it's a state, state mandated,
responsibility.
responsibility.
Would town designation prohibit you from restoring markers that have been damaged?
I don't,
Well, we could adopt a policy relative to that as operating policy for landmarks.
right, I just thought if we did it locally, it would be a nicer,
Well, there is one thing about, if you have a multiple resource district of cemeteries, thematic resource district, and designate them, you're not likely to get any objections from the property owners.
It's just, we're also finding, as the CPF is going and purchasing open spaces, I'm finding tiny little cemeteries. There's a headstone that was found on a piece of property in North Haven, that the people were not told there was a historic cemetery or a headstone on the property when they bought the house in North Haven. And they're reinterring, I think they want to put their swimming pool where this gentleman is buried. And they're moving him, I don't know if it's been done or not yet, but they're moving him to Oakland Cemetery in Sag Harbor. He died in 1790, and in the 1790s. So they're moving him, he's being reinterred. And there's a
It wasn't noted on the survey? That's incredible.
No.
Have they identified
I mean,
ancestors?
I think they went through all the processes
No, but there should be a
of
survey. There should be an actual-
historic. But they're not far from there is a historic cemetery that actually is on a CPF property, so we've taken that.
In North Haven.
In North
Yeah.
Haven, yeah. There are 3, 4 stones that you can
Yep.
see that are standing. It's just very interesting, the cemeteries that we do own, where people were in North Haven, there seem to be a lot of little family plots, and some of them were moved to other larger cemeteries, but these are where they are, and we'll protect them. And then there's another old burying ground in North Haven that's on village property, so I've noticed that that's been maintained. At least some of the big slate headstones are looking pretty good, so. But anyway, so that was just a thought, to at least protect them, and just, anything that we can give awareness to people
what these are. You know, they're burying grounds, but they also are very significant, especially the one here, you know, the two that here in the village, down on Little Plains at 1640s, that was first interment. It was open for 90 years before the one by Stop and Shop, which is the north end burying ground, which was the first interment there is in 1721. And we actually know that because it's on his footstone. Joseph Post, it says, I'm the first to be interred here at the cemetery. So in this place, I think it says. So that's why they're significant beyond all the, you know, the Revolutionary War patriots that are buried in these cemeteries, and the people that founded the town. So.
In some places, cemetery crawls are a popular way of doing history.
Yeah.
So there may be some things to reflect on again, just
Yeah.
about that, you know.
Yeah, I did a tour during the pandemic, and it was one of those freezing cold days. I was shocked so many people came out because everybody had been so cooped up, and we did it in masks, and we were all freezing. But yeah, there's a lot to be learned about the people and the community that was here
Yeah.
before from the headstones. So, anyhow,
Well, we'll give some more thought to it.
Yeah.
Okay? All right.
yeah.
So, speaking about buried things, would you just want to encapsulate a little summary about Remsenburg Academy?
Oh, the metal detecting.
Yes, the metal
Fantastic.
detecting.
I'm so happy.
Yes, we finally have the final agreement, which has been signed by the people.
I think you may have to explain what the
Oh, okay, so
issue is,
the,
yeah.
the Remsenburg Academy is a town landmark. It was built in the Civil War era as a boys' academy. It operated that way for a few years, and then it ceased operation. Probably became part of the Ocean House operation next door, which is a boarding house. But at any rate, it's now a town-owned property, and we have a gentleman who lives in the community who does metal detecting, a lot of metal detecting. He works at all the town parks and beaches and things, and he's got all kinds of equipment, and he's very professional about it. And he's wanted to come and do metal detecting at the academy. So, but because it's a town landmark, et cetera, we had to have some sort of agreement in place because we don't want him to run off willy-nilly with everything he finds there. So we've worked out an agreement where it's quasi-scientific screening of the ground, and anything he finds will be marked on a map, and then you'll take a look at everything. And some things will not be historically significant, and he'll keep those sorts of things. The things that are historically significant will stay in the academy. We have a library in there with locked glass cases, so we can display the artifacts with a map of where they're found, and a little, hopefully develop some sort of educational thing about the things that are found there. So.
Right, and this will be this kind of the start or the, you know, the template for maybe doing this in other places.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting when I was trying to figure out, town owns it, it's landmarked, but it's not a CPF property, so it's not something I could, you know, we could just kind of move in and do, but so now we have this agreement, which is great. So going forward, if he wants to move on to other properties, you know, the windmill, although that was moved there, there was a structure there. It was the professor's house was on that property, so there might be lots of interesting things.
Yep.
Kind of sticking with the school theme. I'm just thinking, you know, boys' suit buttons and things like that. So.
Yeah, so when you meet him, when you come out, when he does his first rounds, you can have a chat with him about it.
Because I'd love to put, you know, I mean, if there are significant things, we can, you know, put things up on the, you know, GPS and mark them that some of these historic things have been found.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's definitely, I think, a lot to be found out there. When I was out there with him the first time, he was, you know, he wasn't digging stuff up, he's just showing me how it all works. But there was definitely plenty of stuff on either side of the walkways going into the front there. So, and it was a part of a farm for many, many years, so I think there'll be probably a lot of farm stuff that's dug up. So it'll be an interesting exercise. So I think as soon as we get the signed agreement back from the supervisor, we can set something up.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Yep.
Now that the weather is beautiful today, so it's
Yeah.
nice. Spring is here.
So,
Okay, thank you. I don't think we have anything important on Stony Brook's historic buildings on the Southampton campus at the moment. There is a landmarks maintenance grant we received, application.
Yeah.
I have not looked at anything. I don't know if anybody else has looked at.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. This is for 29 Dock Road, which is the Craftsman Style House, the most recently designated town landmark. And they have been gradually restoring their original windows. There's a group of outfit that comes out, and they will remove the window from its sash, or its frame. They take it to their workshop. They clean everything up, they reglaze it as necessary, and then they bring it back and they get everything working again with the windows. And he's done several windows so far. It's an outfit called Nantucket Associates, Inc. The restoration cost for each window, both sashes, because they're double hung, is $300. And the cost for removal and reinstallation, including the sash cord replacement, is $200 per each window pair. They would like to do 12 windows, and they are asking for $9,600 to do this. So that's the, and what's done is they remove the sash, they remove the old paint, they reglaze it, re-embed the glass and reglaze it. They prime all the raw wood surfaces. They do finish painting of both the interior and exterior surfaces of each sash. They replace the sash cords, and they reinstall everything back in place. So that's what they would like to do. Okay,
So it's $9,600 as the
$9,600.
estimate.
For 12 windows. Yeah.
This is a recently landmarked
This is their
structure,
first, yeah, this is their first
which-
application. Yeah.
apparently was landmarked with the incentive of getting the opportunity for such a benefit. I would, since this is a first-time application from this applicant, I would propose, we have done 50% in the past, but given the sense that this is a successful landmarking, I would say, what about 2/3? Is that,
Sounds fine.
uh,
This is the only application for this round.
Yeah. And you do want to encourage this. I mean, this is one of
Right.
the benefits that we want to demonstrate.
What?
Yes, it's a small amount, but I think be significant to the homeowner.
yeah, so if I'm willing to go with that, if is there a motion to endorse that
Is
as
is there
a,
a limit to the, how much, or 2/3 period?
Well, they're asking to do 12 windows. They've done some of the windows in the house
Oh.
already, so it may be that these are the last windows, is 12. So I would suggest if we want to do this, we would say 2/3 of, your estimated
well,
project
if
cost.
they, actually, if they say 9,600, is that the
Yes, the total project cost is estimated
estimate? So
96.
2/3 of 96 is $6,400, if a round number is okay.
Okay.
So,
But with the understanding that they're going to do the full 12 windows.
right, yes.
Yeah.
Or be reduced accordingly,
Yes,
proportionally.
proportion. Yep.
So everybody's got that understanding, so, okay. And Vicky made a motion.
I made a motion.
Was there a second? Seconded by Jeff. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye. Okay, the motion is carried. Thank you. Certified local government activity, there is a
Yes, I forwarded an email that we got from SHPO, just advising us that they still have the 2023 CLG grant applications open. It may be a wee bit premature for us to get everything together. We'd have to decide what we want to apply for, go through the application process, which is fairly detailed, but the applications are due May 1st.
Yeah.
And there's no extension on that, so realistically, I think it'll be kind of hard for us to make this year, but it's nice to know what is involved, and seeing as we have an upcoming Zoom with Linda Mackey at SHPO, we'll get a little bit more insight into how the program works, how it's going to affect us, what our obligations and responsibilities are. And we can even ask her, how, does the funding change every year? Is it a static amount for these grants? This I don't know, but,
Excuse me, are the grants different, like different types of?
there are different opportunities. I'll give you my copy. I printed it out here, so you can take a look at it.
I mean, it's probably on
Everything
the
from
website.
surveys to education, to training, there's all kinds of opportunities for grants. But the money has to be expended by the town first, and then it's reimbursed. So there's an outlay of funds, which does get reimbursed by the state. So I think it's a good opportunity for us, and we should really all think hard about what we really want to accomplish on this, yeah.
The one small stumbling block I saw that I thought is that they said that we should pay for 40%
Yes.
of the expenses ourselves, and we don't have a budget.
Right.
Therefore,
This gives us a year to get this budget, to get monies into.
that's just, not that there isn't a way to work around that, but our board, it would have to be the town that would be funding that. But I think it would be great, particularly if I was thinking do something educational for the board itself, so we know. But if we did it in conjunction, I think, does the village have to do an annual, or every couple years there are new members? I went to one there years ago.
Yeah.
15 years ago, 10 years ago, they had one. And I assume Sag Harbor maybe needs, so if anybody else needed to do it, that, because I think they suggested that,
You could collaborate.
so, but that would
It's a
be,
good question that we should,
so if it's
let's
something
ask
that you
Linda.
could get more people together in this area,
right.
and they would benefit because they would get their annual hours in or
Right.
whatever, so.
Right. And there are also requirements if we needed a consultant, there's specific requirements on, the standards that the consultant has to meet, and we'd have to follow the town bidding procedures and all that. It's fairly detailed as to cost breakdown. It all makes sense when you think about it, because we're asking the state for money, we're gonna be asking the town for money, regardless of what the application with a program is, so it requires thought, and I don't think we're ready yet.
Okay. And there is something on April 8th to be reminded about?
It's April 3rd, I believe.
April 3rd.
April
okay.
3rd at 6 o'clock, and we do have a Zoom. And that's our opportunity to hear and learn and ask.
So,
Perfect.
okay, and somebody among us will remind the others that it's upcoming.
I'll send out another reminder.
Not to worry.
But in advance of that, Linda will be sending us a little proposed agenda as well.
Oh, okay. Any other business to be brought before the Landmarks Board? Nothing else? It is now 9:42, and without any further business, this meeting is adjourned.